Hey everyone, I'm Kei-Nova, and today I'm checking out Miasma Chronicles. I don't usually do a big opening or anything, and I'm not going to do that now, but I'm going to keep it really quick and to the point here before I start the review. I'm sick, so while I was recording this review, I had to do it over a period of a couple days, and my voice goes somewhat in and out. It isn't that bad, but I hope you can understand, and I hope you enjoy the review. So, without further ado, this is Miasma Chronicles. Miasma Chronicles is the brainchild of the Bearded Ladies, a small development studio out of Sweden. You might know them from their quirky repertoire, including the likes of Mutant Year Zero, that would be the game with the pig and the mallard as a main character, and Corruption 2029. In fact, including this game, that is their entire repertoire. And sure, they may not be swimming in AAA budgets, but don't let that fool you. The Bearded Ladies consistently churn out games that I personally feel could give the big shots a run for their money. It's pretty apparent that the Bearded Ladies have a bit of a apocalyptic fixation, you could say, especially when it comes to the SRPG genre. Each of their games unfold in post-apocalyptic landscapes, and while that's really common these days, the Bearded Ladies like to inject a little bit of flavor into that formula, weaving captivating tales that unfold in worlds that are at times bizarre and alien, emerging from the ashes of our own. And wow, that was quite the sentence, wasn't it? Miasma Chronicles follows the tale of Elvis, a young mechanic whose mother issues rival that of Ed Gain.
You know my mama?
He's joined by his brother, Diggs, a sentient security robot with an oddly programmed personality that may lean just a little too heavily on 80s stereotypes. Well, certain specific 80s stereotypes.
Rockin' and rollin', we made these boys extinct.
The big twist with the game's setting, besides the fact that it takes place in the American Midwest, is that the miasma has been around so long that humanity sees it as a natural part of the world. It's something straight out of Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, and kudos if you catch that reference. A lot of the game's technology and the ruins that surround its characters are seen in this way, and it leads to a few interesting misunderstandings about the old world.
This robot's spitting paper at me.
It's really up to the player to go out and discover what happened to the world and why it is the way it is now. Be that through finding memos, certain points of interaction in the environment, or Elvis uncovering a dormant machine.
Oh, I can talk for days about Edison. After the collapse, where were they? Up in their sky castles playing video games? Didn't even have the decency to shut me off.
I really found this entertaining when the game remained consistent about it, but there were a lot of occasions where a slip would be made and Elvis or one of his companions would just know something that seemed unlikely. The whole concept of the originals was also interesting, since they represent us. However, I didn't feel like there was any significant difference between the old and new people.
A dead original. Rotting away for God knows how long.
At least in Fallout, there was an explanation that the Vault humans and those who lived in the wasteland had a genetic difference due to exposure. There's nothing like that here. They're just old world people that died.
All of them died. Everybody died.
Being a game taking place after some catastrophic event, it's only expected that something had been ruined by the actions of a shady mega corporation. The whole corporation destroys the world trope has been done to death, but I actually liked what the Bearded Ladies did here. Edson, being a world-saving organization that evolved into a corporation that basically replaced governments globally, spent a good amount of time being genuinely beneficial to humanity. But a massive glitch causes things to go out of control, turning robots sentient and causing nanomachines to go completely out of control, forming the infectious and angry swarms that come to be known as miasma.
What do you know about the collapse?
Same as you. Big breakdown in the great stability. The glitch to end all glitches.
However, being ran by a family with literal access to immortality, its leaders allowed the world to fall into a feudal state so that they could continue to mindlessly run factories and mine resources.
To survive, the town had to make a deal with the devil.
Well, these devils are squeezing the town dry. Wish I could do something about it.
If you played any number of JRPGs where the main character has to save his home from an invading force, you'll be familiar with the game's opening conflict. Tales of Symphonia fans will know what I mean here.
I'm so sad now.
Or, fans of just about any 90s RPG. Elvis is a nobody mechanic. He's trying to escape his surroundings in order to find his mother. He's established as a nobody surviving in the town of Cemetery for an unknown amount of time who just happens to be good with tools. This might have been a really cool character point, but it really is never brought up again and only explains his interactions with deactivated and damaged bots. It's likely also a hint towards developments that come up later in the game's storyline, but I think they might have missed the mark there. On a routine excursion to the wall with his brother Diggs, Elvis accidentally incites the rage of a group of mutants called the Grabbers. They're a race of frogs that has been mutated by the Miasma, and they share its mutual hate for humanity. This conflict represents the first third of Miasma Chronicles, whereas Elvis has to prevent a Grabber invasion on Sedentary.
Let loose the frogs of war! For the humans, there is no escape, no mercy!
This is all just set up for a bigger story though. Sedentary is one of the many mining towns controlled by the mega capitalist First Family, remnants of Edson, as I've mentioned before. To prevent spoilers, I'm not going to go into unveiling too much about them, but even if I did, I can't really put my finger on what their actual motivations were when it came to keeping their factories and businesses alive. Even after completing the game, I was a little confused. It could be that I'm overthinking a message about the uncontrollable and mindless ways of capitalism. Trust me, the capitalism is bad message is prominent through this entire game, and Miasma Chronicles makes that very obvious from the beginning, as even the town of Cemetery is managed by a patriotic head in a jar that only seems to care about living longer and never letting go of his position of power.
What's with the hunched shoulders and sour puss, boy?
One of the most important parts about Miasma Chronicles' first arc is that Elvis has inherited a glove from his mother, one he apparently hasn't been using correctly. This kicks off a quest where the player must traverse the town, talking to its residents in search of a new core. While meeting the game's town personalities is interesting, most are standard post-apocalyptic character tropes. In fact, nearly all of the game's side characters are one-dimensional versions of those found in similar stories. I hate to make this comparison, but if you played anything like any of the Fallout games, or even Rage, nothing here is going to be new or surprising in terms of side character content. After the Grabbers and their leader is taken care of, the game uses the glove to basically segue into an ancient conflict dealing with the Editors and the First Family.
This was Editors versus First Family. It got vicious.
The Editors basically being a group who was able to harness the miasma so that they could use it as a weapon. A lot of this is initially explained through Jade, a character that joins Elvis and Diggs earlier in the game. Personally, she is my favorite character in the entire game, but her origins are hidden. It's very obvious though that she's connected to the First Family because she knows so much about the world and what's going on. It does become frustratingly obvious, especially after hours of playing alongside her. This makes Elvis appear a bit stupid, especially when Elvis is destroying holographic footage of her brother in front of him or revealing the same miasma controlling glove as Elvis midway through the game. Even the game's controller enemies walk around stating that they're looking for Jade at one point.
Scanning for Jade.
And the writers apparently found this to be such a good plot development that later on they even used it to establish conflict between Elvis and Jade. This isn't the only particularity in Miasma Chronicles' writing. While Elvis is a somewhat motivated and strong character while looking for his mother, Momma, the eventual revelations are handled in a baffling manner not just for Elvis, but Diggs as well. Let's just say the moment Momma is discovered, everything just kind of falls apart in a lot of ways. And I am avoiding spoilers here because Miasma Chronicles' story is worth exploring. However, I won't pretend that the big reveal surrounding Elvis isn't a tad disappointing. I would have preferred him to remain the bubbly Midwestern mechanic from a mining town who rises to become a force of change, rather than essentially becoming the chosen one. There's something much more appealing about a character who overcomes adversity to achieve greatness rather than being born into it. I do feel the need to mention that there are also a handful of side quests in the game, but almost none of them actually flesh out the storyline in any meaningful way, aside from maybe one. I don't find this sort of thing too offensive. Some people don't like to play through every single side quest, so keeping the majority of its story contained within the main campaign is courteous, if anything. Side content is great, but it makes more sense to be just that rather than containing something which should be part of the game's greater narrative, because if you don't experience it, then the narrative just isn't there. I will say that the one side quest that is important to the plot does reveal more about Jade yet again, almost blatantly.
Conspiracy hut. This guy had crazy ideas. Aliens creating the miasma.
Right. What did he used to say? The truth is out there.
Pretty sure aliens would skip this planet.
And it isn't that I managed to do the quest too early, because it has to be completed before the game's point of no return. The actual plot development with Jade occurs after that. Miasma Chronicles is part of the Bearded Ladies lineup of party-based SRPG titles, so it plays a lot like their earlier games with a little bit of streamlining. For those unfamiliar, since not everybody has played an SRPG, when combat occurs, you'll be controlling the actions of a small party of characters across a grid. Now, there's a lot of media out there that say that this is a tactical RPG, but I argue the fact that they're pretty much the same thing. So I'm going to be calling this an SRPG from here on out, no matter what, because that's just the way I see it. While a lot of other SRPGs like Disgaea or Shining Force allow you to control a variable army of characters, Miasma Chronicles gives you Diggs and Elvis with an optional third companion to play with. If you're old, you'll recognize this system from games like XCOM. If you're younger, you'll recognize this system from games like XCOM 2. Of course, those games allow for a bigger squad to play with. Miasma Chronicles never exceeds 3 controllable characters at any time. According to Lee Varley, the game's director, a bit of additional inspiration came from games such as Final Fantasy and Xenogears. With its underdog beginning and ingrained technology, I can see how that applies to the storyline of Miasma Chronicles. However, I don't think that transfers to the gameplay. I'm sure that some may argue that Final Fantasy Tactics is an SRPG, so this game must be what he's talking about, but there were plenty of SRPGs before that game was even released. Now, I would be lying if I was to say that the majority of Miasma Chronicles gameplay is some refreshing take on the SRPG subgenre. That really isn't the case. While the game's stealth and flanking systems are certainly unique and well done, they are merely more perfected versions of those seen in Mutant Year Zero. That being said, you are getting a far more solid and streamlined experience here. Everything from abilities, leveling, and stats to barrier protection, hit chance, and special weapon attributes barely have to be explained. Everything in Miasma Chronicles is put together in a way that can be visually understood quite well. For instance, when a character is ducking behind a piece of terrain, either a full or half shield is shown. This lets the player know which offers the best protection, and when firing, rather than having more specific percentage values, damage is shown as having a 20, 50, or 100% chance of occurring. Now, even though I very briefly summarized the stealth system as a more perfected version of Mutant Year Zero's, I can't simply move on without mentioning how good it is. Early on in the game, you're introduced to silenced weapons, and while the game doesn't have a whole lot of them, the system is a whole lot of fun once you learn how to take advantage of it. Stealth works a little bit like a hybrid between the game's exploration and combat sections, and represents probably the most tactical part about the game. It's also strategy, so I still hold by my argument that a SRPG and tactical RPG are pretty much the same thing. Players can separate a character from the main group and navigate alone in order to hide in certain blind spots and pick off enemies one by one. Criticals are guaranteed, so depending on the enemy and attack selected, it's possible to kill an enemy without initiating a full-on battle.
Very satisfying.
This really helps eliminate the threat of larger groups and makes the game's tougher and more drawn-out sections far easier to handle. It also happens to be the most satisfying aspect of the game's combat, especially when able to take down the vast majority of enemies in an area. Later on, it's possible to use 2 characters with silent weapons to take down enemies with larger health pools that can otherwise be a very big pain to take on alone, especially collector units. Of course, those who really don't like the idea of stealth don't even have to use it. Miasma Chronicles allows players to equip any character with any sort of weapon and play however they like. The only genuine exception comes from editor abilities, which only Elvis possesses for about the first third of the game. After he passes the wall, however, this is no longer the case. Editor abilities are essentially the game's magic system. Characters with an editor's glove are able to harness miasma abilities obtained through vortexes throughout the game. While it would have been easy to simply give the player more destructive abilities, the Bearded Ladies instead made the vast majority of these more creative. It's only a shame that the game's form of mana, kilowatts, are so easily expended. Because of this, the relatively mass amount of miasma abilities you do obtain over the game go mostly unused. These abilities range from throwing around enemies and summoning explosive barrels to spawning around rival creatures, and mind control. A few offensive abilities do exist, but these tend to be a little bit underwhelming, if not underpowered. Once you become more familiar with the game's physics and status effects, this isn't too much of a problem. It is far more satisfying to spawn an explosive barrel in a group of enemies and have another character set it off than it is to use something like the game's weak chain shock ability, though even that can have a purpose if the right status effect chips are equipped.
Relax and breathe. Relax and breathe.
When it comes to equipment, there are a load of weapons to obtain through stores, exploration, and side quests, yet they tend to be a little lacking. Few weapons have significant stat increases or special effects, and even fewer are silenced. In my 30 hours of playing the game, I was only able to find 2 silenced weapons. One came equipped with Jade, and remained the only weapon I used with her character until the very end of the game. If a weapon has an effect that can disable an enemy, rather than a high damage output, it's always the better option. This game isn't made for tanking, and there seems to be an active effort to force players to think outside the box. This might also be why the game's numerous grenade types can be so useful in tight situations, most of them focusing on ailments rather than direct damage.
This'll raise your spirits!
Of course, being an SRPG/tactical SRPG, it's important to learn enemy weaknesses and strengths as well. Certain enemies and subtypes have resistances to certain effects, deflect a portion of damage back at the player, or create duplicates of themselves after being hit. Shadow Mimic types can mimic a character, stacking their abilities and resistances on top of their own, and as with the rest of the Mimic enemy type, always leave a pool of acid upon defeat. Yes, it seems like the Miasma's most versatile creation are these mimics. Whilst the First Family's collector machines are touted as the epitome of enemy types, even coming with their own achievement for beating one, they don't hold a candle to these acid-blooded humanoids. These enemies are the bane of the entire game, capable of everything I mentioned before, as well as teleporting directly to a target. Nothing else in the game really compares to the challenge these monsters provide, and while additional difficulties were provided that allowed a challenge less frustrating than that of Mutant Zero, I was absolutely not willing to go below the normal difficulty, though I was certainly tempted to do so on more than one occasion. Miasma Chronicles can be downright brutal even on its most regular setting.
Who are those people?
That's not people. That's miasma shaping itself into a new enemy.
I fully expected Miasma Chronicles to be full of the typical gunmetal in black, and it does have a lot of that, but I was surprised to find that the game did have a bit of diversity in its initial environments. You are going to be seeing a lot of ruined city areas, destroyed vehicles, maybe a busted up future truck or two, and busted robots galore. In a world ravaged by a technological apocalypse, these things are just expected. But the area of Kentucky seems to be on the mend in a lot of ways. While the miasma persists and technology still hums despite it being in disarray, nature has begun to engulf the past. With a minimized human presence, swamplands have recovered, trees have healed, and plant life thrives. Arkansas and Nevada, though, those are where the visuals seem to take an overly familiar quality, comprised of the same tired post-apocalyptic dust bowls and rusty buildings that gamers have seen for decades now. Regrettably, this also translates into the character and enemy design. While Sedentary is an entertaining mix of frontier mining and backwater country towns, it's the only actual area like it. The game's largest settlement, the DRC, is simply another rust-brown post-world city. Residents go from quirky misplaced tropes to an absolutely generic population of road warrior-esque humans and sentient robots.
Okay, but what does that mean? What does that mean?
Of all the player characters in the game, I only found Jade's design to be interesting. With Grey consuming one side of her body, her eye white, I wanted to know more about what did this to her. There's a visual story with her character that isn't presented with anyone else in the game. I only wish that her story ended up a little more interesting and possibly more fleshed out. Elvis and Diggs look as they were intended, a supposed mechanic and his robot. Their dynamic and Elvis's red clothing made me think of Full Metal Alchemist, and I'd love to know if this was the inspiration here. I like to say that their and every other character's alternate costumes are far more interesting and should have been default, but I can't help but feel that they really don't suit the game's early setting. Seeing Diggs in a duster jacket just wouldn't have had the same effect, but I gotta say that's probably one of my favorite costumes in the entire game. Enemy designs are a mixed bag. While the grabbers are clearly Miasma Chronicles orc-like race, they are still far more interesting than the plant and mimic creatures which follow them. There's a great amount of attention paid to these guys, and it's interesting to see their choice of crew clothing and weapons hanging from glistening wet skin. Though humanoid, they flop about, struggling with their awkward biology. I really just wish that there was a bit more effort put into the other enemies. There are only 2 true variants of plant monsters, while the majority of mimics are just human-esque blobs. There is an interesting, almost Egyptian design when it comes to the First Family's collector units. However, there isn't enough variation in their designs to keep them interesting after 30 hours of gameplay. This could also be because the game's lighting acts in a way that hides all but their forms, cloaking details under deep black shadow. Well, at least for the majority of the game, there are areas where they are somewhat more visible, but those are far and few between. Miasma Chronicles has a few problems that extend past its occasional graphical hangups. Sure, there is stuttering here and there, and sometimes an object might float somewhere it shouldn't, but most of the time these issues are dependent on the capabilities of a player's system. I played through the entire game on a laptop using an AMD Ryzen 7 5800H processor and a 3050 Ti GPU. I have 16GB of RAM installed, but admittedly I'm not really sure of its specifics. This laptop does run hot at times, so the performance did occasionally suffer due to that factor. The game did remain graphically impressive, however. I was even able to run it on the highest settings until reaching the game's final settlement area. At that point though, there was just so many NPCs that my computer started to chug. My biggest gripe with the game is how the entire experience has been bottom-ended. Almost every major plot development, aside from a few, and interesting unlockable, doesn't occur until reaching its final areas. There are quite a few interesting costumes that would have made the game feel a little more varied visually if obtainable earlier in the game. However, the quests to obtain them are pushed to the very end of the game. Not only that, Sedentary's head in a jar mayor does end up joining the party merely moments before its final area.
I must be tripping. That robo looks like Mayor Mason.
Holy shit. That is Mayor Mason.
Greetings, champions. Please, enjoy these yummy burgers, courtesy of Diesel D.
It is you.
No.
There is no time to learn more about this character or his motivations aside from an obsession with living forever. Unless the player was to wait until the very end of the game to tackle most of the side quests, which really isn't a good idea, they won't be using him much. I didn't use him at all.
I keep telling you, if you don't project power, someone's gonna take it from you.
The leveling system was fun, but very bare. I did like going out of my way to tackle side objectives and random enemy groups, but when I hit a level cap of 25, unable to fill the skill tree, I was seeing shades of BioWare.
This one is unworthy.
I don't, for the life of me, know why the developers capped the level at this point, especially when residual skill points exist that can never be spent.
Huh?
As I mentioned a moment ago, a large chunk of the game's major plot developments exist after the game's point of no return. I really feel that these could have been more spaced out, especially Jade's very obvious reveal as a member of the First Family. I would throw up a spoiler warning if not for the fact that the collector enemies will vocally say they are looking for her around halfway through the game. And there is even a side quest where this is explicitly said before the plot even reveals it. This is only speculation, but paired with a strange level cap that leaves unspendable skill points, I have a feeling that perhaps development became rushed at some point, or there's some kind of planned sequel. And yes, there is a somewhat open ending, and there is no New Game Plus. Visually, Miasma Chronicles certainly looks like a AAA game, yet there is a sense of ambition that I can't shake off. This is certainly a game made of passion by people who clearly spent a lot of time playing games in a time where originality was key. Sadly, we don't live in an era where something new, striking, and a little offbeat garners the amount of attention it should. Big ideas that allow players to dip their toes into new worlds without the promise of a second installment used to be common and acceptable, and so did open endings. In 2023, this really isn't the case. A neat and tidy experience is what people want, not a game that is both open in flaws and ends. That being said, I'm not one of those people. Miasma Chronicles sparked my imagination. It had me completing every bit of it and wanting to see where things went. Did it falter near its final areas? Yeah, but this is a game made by real people who dared to do something different with a common idea. In my opinion, all of the flaws I've mentioned give Miasma Chronicles its identity. This one is going to be on my mind for quite some time, and I can't recommend it enough if you're in the market for a party-based SRPG/tactical RPG. And hey, if you like real people making games, then why not follow a real person playing them and making videos about them? Like and subscribe to support the channel. I'm Kei-Nova, and I'll see you in the next video.